Ian Henneman sings Sunday afternoons at 4 Eastern on CBC Radio 1.
You know the feeling of finding a really good podcast? Or the feeling of someone always being there, like your favorite radio show? Stream CBC Podcasts, CBC Music, and CBC Radio anytime, anywhere. Download the CBC Listen app.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Rosanna Hempel. At 12 o'clock, it's -9 in Winnipeg. Flurries today, a high of -4. A replacement for the Arlington Bridge could cost significantly less than the city had previously thought. The bridge closed more than a year ago because of concerns about its structural integrity. The CBC's Cameron McLean reports.
A new Arlington Bridge could take 6 years to build and cost a little more than $166 million, according to a new report. That's almost half of an earlier estimate done in 2019. That design had 3 lanes of traffic, 2 northbound and 1 southbound. The new one has just 2 lanes. The city plans to build the new bridge right where the current one sits, which means the existing bridge will need to be demolished. Engineers assessed the bridge earlier this year to see if repairs could extend its life. But Public Works Chair Janice Luke says the bridge is too deteriorated and must be torn down. The city is facing financial challenges, which make proceeding with the work on the new bridge difficult. Luke says design work may begin next year, but it could be a while before construction can begin, unless other governments commit funding. Cameron McLean, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Manitoba's police watchdog is asking for anyone who saw a police-involved shooting last night to contact its investigators. The Independent Investigation Unit has taken over the case that happened last evening in a parking lot near Unicity Shopping Centre. Winnipeg police say an officer on the scene of a retail theft investigation was stabbed in the throat. A man was then shot by police. In video posted on social media, 2 police officers can be seen with guns pointed at a man just outside a bus shelter. They're heard telling him to drop his weapon as he walks towards them. The suspect was pronounced dead in hospital. The injured officer is in stable condition. Justin Trudeau is trying to rally NATO allies to keep up their support for Ukraine. The Prime Minister spoke to parliamentarians from NATO countries at a conference in Montreal. It comes at a time when any future American support for Kyiv is facing uncertainty. Rafi Bouchikanian has more.
Russia's illegal invasion is not just about redrawing lines in the map.
A message Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been repeating for more than 2 years.
It's about reintroducing into the world the idea that might makes right.
Now pitching it to politicians from other NATO countries, saying it's their job to repeat this when they return home from a conference in Montreal, at a time when incoming U.S. President Donald Trump has signaled he may end U.S. support for Ukraine.
The role that you have as parliamentarians is to make sure that in your debates, your citizens understand what is at stake in Ukraine.
Canada is also facing renewed scrutiny for not spending 2% of GDP on defense, fulfilling its NATO commitment, something Trump repeatedly brought up in his first term. Trudeau insists the government will reach that target by 2032. Rafi Bouchikanian on CBC News, Ottawa.
A London, Ontario judge is expected to hear legal arguments today in the case against 5 former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey team. The players are charged with sexual assault. The incident at the center of the case allegedly took place in the city in June of 2018. Lawyers for the players say their clients are expected to plead not guilty. A jury trial is scheduled for April. At least 17 people are missing after a tourist yacht sank today in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt. Egyptian officials say 28 people were rescued, with some airlifted for medical treatment. The yacht, which was embarking on a 5-day cruise, issued a distress call shortly after dawn. It's not known yet what led to the sinking. Many tourist companies have recently been limiting their operations in the Red Sea due to the conflicts in the region. The crash of a DHL cargo plane in Lithuania is now investigated by officials of several European countries. The fight originated in Germany, and that country's foreign minister says the crash may be more than a technical failure.
Sondern wir hatten zuletzt in Europa mehrfach hybride Angriffe gesehen.
Annalena Baerbock says Europe has seen a string of hybrid attacks against individuals and infrastructure facilities. Germany is currently probing several fires caused by firebombs hidden in parcels, and some officials are pointing a finger at Russia. Today's crash killed one member of the crew and injured 3 others. Advocates across Canada are calling for more action to end intimate partner violence. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. In Ontario, the opposition NDP wants the provincial government to declare an epidemic of intimate partner violence. MPP Kristen Wong-Tam says it would give victims greater access to legal support and housing.
Declaring intimate partner violence an epidemic would not just be symbolic, it would bring critical attention and resources to a pervasive issue. It would also ensure that we treat the crisis with the urgency it demands. It will also have a legal impact in Ontario's justice system.
Premier Doug Ford voiced his support for the move back in April, but Wong-Tam says the government has done nothing since. And that is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local CBC News is at 12:30.
Magandang hapon. Good afternoon, Manitoba. Faith Fundal here in Studio 15 at Portage and Spence. This is Radio Noon on CBC Radio 189.3 FM, 990 AM in Winnipeg, in Thompson, 100.9 FM in Dauphin, 105.3 FM. Good afternoon as well to the folks watching us on our CBC Manitoba YouTube stream. Lots to come on the program today. For people fleeing domestic violence, it may be harder to find a spot in emergency shelter these days, in part due to the housing crisis. We'll hear details of that story. On our call-in conversation, how hard has it been for you to find a family doctor? We speak with the mayor of Steinbach about the initiatives they're taking to recruit physicians. That's coming up in our next half hour of the program. First, though, a new self-guided tour is putting the spotlight on the history of Latvian Canadians in Manitoba. Many of the sites to be showcased are in the RM of Latvian. We'll hear more from the CBC's Emily Brass. Still to come. Marshall Hodgins is on the controls today. Wendy Parker is our studio director, and Kevin Nipatebo is our streaming producer. Thanks very much for joining us today. We're just about 7.5 minutes after 12 o'clock. A new self-guided tour is putting the spotlight on the history of Latvian Canadians in Manitoba. And many of the sites to be highlighted are in the RM of Latvian. That area once boasted one of the largest Latvian communities in Canada. CBC reporter Emily Brass recently visited Latvian as part of our series called Communities in Focus. She spoke with the CBC's Marcy Marcusa.
How did you first hear about Latvian's significant Latvian Canadian community?
Well, as we were gearing up to go to Latvian for Communities in Focus, we put out a call to our listeners to send us story pitches, and we got an email from Riva Kirkland. She lives on a farm that has been in her family for 4 generations, and Riva is carrying on a lot of the same tasks her great-grandparents did, growing root vegetables like beets, potatoes, garlic, and onions, and raising chickens in the same coop her ancestors used.
Every year that when it comes around, it's like, okay, we're getting chickens again. It just feels normal. But when you stop for a second and think how special it is to be the 4th generation doing that in that same building, it's pretty unique and it's pretty special. So I try to take a moment and not take that for granted every year.
So that coop was built by her great-grandfather, Peter Karklin, who settled in the area in 1912. And he established a homestead in the little hamlet of Latonia, about 20 kilometers northeast of the town of Latvian. That name, Latonia, translates to Little Latvia, and it was named because so many Latvians set up homes there.
Who knew, right? I love these
Right.
stories. So how big was the Latvian community in the Latvian area then?
Well, just before World War II, Latvian had the biggest Latvian population in Canada west of Toronto. And the community might not hold that claim anymore, but their numbers are still significant. If you drive around town, you'll see long-standing businesses like Osis Building Supplies and Dansit's Fine Foods, which are some of the Latvian names in that region. And many of the local Latvian Canadian families came during a wave of immigration in the early 1900s, including Riva's great-grandfather, Peter Karklin. He was one of many who left Latvia to escape political unrest. Russian Tsarist forces cracked down on people they perceived as a threat, and thousands of Latvians were imprisoned, exiled, and executed. Now, Riva's Aunt Susan was born in 1952. She grew up on that family farm, and she remembers a lot of her grandfather's stories about those days.
He was under threat of his life being taken, and he stowed away on a ship, came to Canada, homesteaded here in 1912 or 13. He had 2 sons here with my grandmother. He sent for her in about 1913 because they needed brides. He did the usual homesteading where you clear land and you build a house and then you're given the title to the property.
And you said that your grandfather didn't expect to stay?
No, they came here to seek refuge, and he thought that it was going to be better in Latvia after the Russians took over, but that wasn't the case. And when he finally realized it, he lost a few friends that would go back to check out the situation, and he would never hear from them again. And then I guess he just turned his back and said, you know what, this is where we're going to be living, and we just grew up knowing that we would be Canadian.
Were they able to keep in touch with their family back home?
Sadly, Peter and Olga Karklin never saw their loved ones in Latvia again. And the family couldn't even send mail back home for fear of reprisal, and letters to Canada were sent with extreme caution. Susan says relatives in Latvia never, ever wrote down the address for Peter Karklin in Latonia. They passed it down verbally so he wouldn't be found by Russian authorities. The Karklins still have some of those letters, and Riva paid a translator to read them.
I paid somebody from Latvia to do a FaceTime call with me to try to translate some of these letters. And the way they were just amazed. They were saying, like, my hand is so weak, I can hardly hold the quill. Like, I'm ill with whatever sickness. And it was just like these really haunting, beautiful letters. They're so incredible. So they barely were able to keep in touch. And there's even one envelope it's like stamped, inspected by USSR, like, officials. Like, it was a really rough time trying to find your family again in Latvia.
So the Karklins did what many Latvians did and helped build up a strong community here in Manitoba. In fact, Riva and Susan say a lot of people left that country and set out not just for Canada, but specifically for Lac du Bonny, because they heard a lot of Latvians were settling there.
Let's go back to what I said at the beginning, Emily. Now their stories are going to be told in a new self-guided tour?
Yes, the Lac du Bonny and District Historical Society is curating a tour featuring family farms and other noteworthy locations connected to Latvian Manitoban history. I spoke with Terry Tottle from the Historical Society, and he says thousands of immigrants came to Lac du Bonny and the surrounding areas in the early 1900s to find work, because that's when several hydro generating stations were being built along the Winnipeg River in Pinawa, Pointe du Bois, Slave Falls, and Great Falls.
It was difficult to get people from Winnipeg to come, and they advertised in the local papers, and up to 2,000 men were employed, and mostly Eastern Europeans and Scandinavians came. And after the construction of the generating stations were completed, they learned that they could get homesteads. This was the last area in the province to get homesteads up until 1930, so they were able to acquire 160 acres for $10, and it was very similar to the land back home.
Pretty nice price there.
No doubt, yeah.
It doesn't compare to current times at all. But that's one element that'll be featured in the new booklet and self-guided tour called Latvian Heritage Trail, Footprints from Winnipeg to Lac du Bonny. And it'll also feature sites here in the capital city, as well as Latonia, Lee River, and Libau.
So what else might people see and learn about on the, as you said, Latvian Heritage Trail?
Well, one of the stops will be the Karklin homestead, where several buildings put up by Riva's great-grandfather are still standing. We mentioned the chicken coop earlier, but there's also the family's original dwelling, which is this tiny log cabin that's now being used as a shed, and the barn that was built by Peter Karklin in the early 1900s with help from his neighbors. It's made of hand-hewn logs that are held together by hand-cut dovetails, and so there's no nails. And Susan says the reason it's still in good shape, while most of the other old homestead buildings in the area are not, is that her father later had the foresight to put a tin roof on it. So the barn is listed in the Manitoba Historical Society's archives as an example of the construction style used by early Latvian settlers. It's also attracted some noteworthy guests over the years, including the Latvian ambassador to Canada, and Susan Karklin got to be his tour guide.
It was very exciting. He visited the cemetery, but he also wanted to visit the Karklin homestead because of the barn, and we have pictures of him in front of the barn. Also a few other Latvian buildings that were on the road on the way here, and yeah, it was very, very exciting. It made me feel really special. I think it made the whole community feel special. And then we entertained him at the museum. We also made him a typical Latvian brunch, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. I wished he had had more time, but he was in Winnipeg sending the troops from Shiloh to Latvia. Yeah, it was a whirlwind tour. But the ambassador before him had also visited. So we've had 2 of the Latvian ambassadors in this area.
And Susan mentioned the Latonia Cemetery, which will also be a stop on the new self-guided tour. And not only are the Karklins buried there, but so many local Latvian ancestors. And some of the headstones are even inscribed in Old Latvian. And that Latvian Heritage Trail is slated to launch in January.
Emily Brass is a reporter here at CBC Manitoba. She visited Lac du Bonny this fall as part of our series called Communities in Focus. She was speaking earlier with the CBC's Marcy Marcusa.
This winter, help us make the season kind by supporting Harvest Manitoba. I'm Vince Barletta, CEO of Harvest Manitoba. All it takes is 1 can of food, $1, or even 1 hour of your time. Join CBC as we donate a day of programming in support of Harvest Manitoba December 6th. Find ways to give to Harvest Manitoba at cbc.ca/kindmb.
You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM here in Winnipeg. Hello to the folks watching us on our CBC Manitoba YouTube stream. I'm in for Janet Stewart. We are seeing light snow falling here in downtown Winnipeg. -8 is the current temperature. We're expecting flurries for the rest of today and still hoping for a high of -4 degrees. In Brandon, this hour, drifting snow at the airport, -15 is the current temperature with a west-northwesterly wind at 40 kilometers an hour. With a wind chill, it feels like -28. We are expecting sun and cloud, hopefully, as the day progresses. For Dauphin this hour, light snow falling, -12 degrees, westerly winds gusting at 42 as well. Expecting a few flurries, ending then a high of -7, so still a ways to go there. Thompson this hour, light snow falling, -13 degrees, light snow expected for the rest of today, pretty close to our expected daytime temperature of high of -11. And for Churchill today, flurries in the forecast, high of -8. Right now at the airport in Churchill, light snow and -9 degrees. And if you're just joining us now, our call-in conversation in our next half hour is going to be about finding a family doctor. We're going to hear from the mayor of Steinbach about the initiatives that community and he are taking to recruit physicians. Stay tuned for that conversation coming up after your 12:30 local news. Emergency shelters are meant to be a temporary refuge for those fleeing domestic violence, but it can be harder to secure a spot these days, in part due to the housing crisis across the country. There's a new report out today from Women's Shelters Canada. Of the shelter workers they surveyed, nearly all said that it's become harder to support survivors seeking housing, and that more people are staying in shelters for longer. The CBC's Robin Bresnahan recently visited Interval House, a shelter in Ottawa. She discovered there's an urgent need for more space.
So we're just standing on a residential street in Ottawa, looking at a single-family home that is soon going to be demolished.
Carrie Lewis cannot wait to see this house come down, because what's going up in its place is desperately needed.
10 brand new apartments that will be used as second stage or transitional housing for families in Ottawa.
Carrie runs Interval House. It's an emergency shelter for women fleeing abuse and violence, alongside their dependents and their pets. Carrie has been planning and hoping for this new housing project since December 2020. It's being funded by the City of Ottawa, and Carrie says it is so needed. That's because, in the midst of a national housing crisis, it can now take years for a woman who's fled domestic violence to find an affordable place to live. One of the women living at Interval House knows this all too well.
No space. No space, no space, no space. You just want somewhere to sleep, somewhere to be safe where nobody's going to find you.
Tanya came to Interval House just over a year ago. We're not using her real name because it might put her and her family in danger. She and her children fled their home after Tanya's partner became violent following a tragedy involving one of their children.
What do you remember about the day that you decided you needed to get out?
There were many days. And if, okay, I have this chance now and I have to get it out. And it's not only run, it's just like, what do we take and where are we going to put? It is so confusing because your heart is pounding for your life. Pretty much it's running for your life. And by now I learned, yes, women can be killed. Women get killed. In a minute, it takes a minute.
Tanya, her kids, her elderly mother, and their 2 dogs have a place in this shelter now. But the path here was anything but straightforward. For months, Tanya called various women's shelters around Ottawa, only to hear there was no space. So they moved around, staying with friends, the occasional hotel, Airbnbs, and eventually, when her bank account was empty, they lived in her car.
And one of my children, we have asthma, and it was getting very cold. Having to use all your resources, having to borrow from everyone that you know, or having to be asking, it's horrible. It's horrendous.
At the time, Tanya didn't know that calling the City of Ottawa's 311 helpline was an option when she and her family decided to flee. City officials say they do not require any paperwork or documentation from people seeking refuge when fleeing from violence. But Tanya wasn't aware of that, and so she got passed from government agency to government agency, caught in a bureaucratic nightmare. Finally, 6 months after fleeing their home, moving from place to place, Tanya and her family got a spot at Interval House. Tanya expected they would be in the shelter for a few months. After all, it is meant to be a temporary emergency shelter. But despite searching for more than a year, she can't find an affordable place for her and her family to live.
A woman should not be here more than 3 months, especially when you live with other people and we share with other people, many other women and different kind of life. It makes it very hard because you lose your patience, and 3 months is actually a lot. But when you go to 6 months, 9 months, a year, and then we lose our mind.
She said herself that no one should be living in this environment for more than 3 months, and she's 100% right. Our shelters were not designed for long stays.
As the executive director of the shelter, Carrie Lewis absolutely understands where Tanya's anger and frustration comes from, and she's not offended.
When I started back 25 years ago, it was like 6 to 10 weeks that people would stay with us. And we were the place where people came for that immediate safety, to get all the supports in place so that they could move on with their lives. And within that time, we would be able to support them to move into housing. And at that time, there were different housing options. There was subsidized housing that was accessed a lot, but that was a time when people could actually afford market rent, so they could leave the shelter and move into market rent. But now what's happening with folks staying for so long is that it creates this like bottleneck effect, so that people are staying here much longer than they need to. And then folks who are in emergency situations in the community have nowhere to go. I looked at our last year, and of the ones who did request shelter, we had to turn away almost 800 because we had no capacity. It's like a train wreck about to happen, and it's just a little bit out of control. And as a whole system, we're not working fast enough to prevent the train wreck. We need to address the housing crisis that exists in our country. This crisis didn't happen by accident. We didn't prioritize housing people. Housing is a right. Everyone should be able to afford a place to live that meets the needs of their families. I hear from all levels of government an acknowledgement that housing is is an emergency, it's a crisis, and we need to be doing something about it. But in terms of action, we're not building affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, actual affordable housing at the rate that we need to address the need.
Right across Canada, it's the same story. Women's Shelters Canada recently sent out a survey to shelter workers from coast to coast to gauge the situation. Anuradha Dugal is the organization's executive director.
Because there's nowhere for women to go after a shelter, 94% of emergency shelters that responded to our survey said that survivors are remaining longer. Women aren't leaving shelters, and so people can't come into shelters.
Over the next 4 years, the organization hopes to help fund the building of 16 transitional housing projects in Canada. This includes one in New Brunswick and another in northern Alberta. Here in Ottawa, the new 10-unit transitional housing complex is set to be completed by next summer. By that time, Tanya hopes she'll be into a home of her own. Because right now, her main fear is that her teens can't take life in the shelter for much longer.
I don't want my kids to leave because we can't get a place. And that scares me a lot. And the excuse will be, there's too many people waiting. We know there's too many people. How can we have hope? How can I even tell my children to have hope? I was afraid of my life, but now I am afraid of not being able to wait anymore.
For CBC Radio, I'm Robin Bresnahan in Ottawa.
Thanks very much, Robin. Here in Manitoba, shelters provided more than 68,000 bed nights to parents and children needing a safe place to stay. If you or someone you know needs help, you can call the provincial toll-free crisis and support line. It's 1-877-977-0007. That's 1-877-977-0007.
Your local news at your fingertips.
CBC News has a local news app made for your phone or tablet.
So don't waste time scrolling for the local stories you want. Just download the app to get the information that matters to you, when it happens,
and how you want it.
Another way to get your local news. The CBC News app. Download it today.
Bit of time now. We have some time for music. Let's take a listen to Tyler Mullendore. This is Living the Dream.
Somebody saying something about where you've been is who you are. Well, life is funny sometimes, and it's a winding road. Some folks get a free ride, some haul a heavy load. Some call it wild stuff.
That was Tyler Mullendore with Living the Dream. You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1 and on our CBC Manitoba YouTube stream. We're going to continue the show in our next half hour. For more, we're going to talk to the mayor of Steinbach about the initiatives he and the community there are taking to recruit physicians. And we'll also welcome your phone calls. That's all coming up after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon, I'm Rosanna Hempel. At 12:30, it's -8 in Winnipeg. Flurries today, a high of -4. Manitoba municipalities are ramping up the pressure on the NDP government. They want the province to roll back the powers of the municipal board. The CBC's Bartley Kivas reports.
For years, Manitoba mayors and reeves have been complaining about a decision made by Brian Pallister's PC government. That government expanded the powers of the provincially appointed municipal board, allowing that unelected board to overturn land use decisions made by elected city and town councils. Wabkanu's NDP government has promised to review the board and send fewer decisions in front of it. The Association of Manitoba Municipalities wants more sweeping changes. At a convention that started today, some say they want the board eliminated altogether. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Manitoba's police watchdog is asking anyone with information or video of a police-involved shooting to contact them. It comes after the Independent Investigation Unit says a police officer was stabbed and a suspect was shot. It happened last night around 5 o'clock in a parking lot near the Unicity Mall. Winnipeg police say an officer on the scene of a retail theft investigation was stabbed in the throat. Police then shot the man. In a social media video, 2 officers can be seen with guns pointed at a man just outside a bus shelter. They're heard telling him to drop his weapon as he walks towards them. The suspect was pronounced dead in hospital. The injured officer is in stable condition. After a weekend of workshops and meetings, the NATO summit in Montreal is coming to a close.
Parliamentarians across NATO countries represent almost 1 billion people in the world. And the conversations that you have and the leadership you show on bringing your citizens along is more important than ever.
That is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressing the parliamentary leaders on hand from the 32 NATO countries. He says the greatest threat to the alliance is not just armed aggressors, but also those who destabilize democracy with attacks on truth. The primary focus of the weekend summit was NATO's ongoing support of the Ukrainian war effort. That is the CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local CBC News is at 1:30.
All right, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
That is Rosanna Hempel from your CBC Winnipeg local news desk. Maligayang araw, hello Manitoba. Faith Fundal here in the host chair on Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. I'm in for Janet Stewart, and hello as well to the folks watching us on our CBC Manitoba YouTube stream. Marshall Hodgins on the controls, Wendy Parker, our studio director, and Kevin Nipatebo is our streaming producer. Hello. And hello as well to Riley Lachuk. You've been talking about this for a while now, and it's finally here.
Yeah.
The
a little bit of light snow in Winnipeg this morning.
And I have to say, I still, against the advice of some folks, took my scooter to work today. So we'll see if I can make it home.
Okay.
Because there wasn't this much snow when I scooted to work.
A little bit of light snow. I think by the time we get to the end of the day today, we will get to realize that 2-ish centimeters of snow that I was talking about on Friday over the course of, I guess, late Saturday through Monday. Back to the west, though. I have seen some reports, and I'm going to put a call out here for some snow pics, especially through western Manitoba, to talk back at cbc.ca. I want to see how much snow has fallen in your neck of the woods, especially if you're in the west or parts of the north of our province. I know I did see a couple of reports online around the Swan River area of 30-plus centimeters of snow. Still a little bit of light snow falling in the west through the afternoon. But places like Brandon, down through Souris, into Boissevain, already back into a mainly sunny sky at the moment. In Winnipeg, a little bit of light snow that kind of follows Highway 6 up to the Narrows. But I think that we will keep the cloud cover here in Winnipeg through the afternoon. Clouds feature quite prominently in the forecast over the next week. So doesn't mean that there won't be some sunny breaks and we won't see some sunshine, but we will see a bit more cloud as we get through the week here, hanging around. Kind of what you see is what you get almost. -8 in Winnipeg right now. Back to the west where things have cleared, -15 in Brandon, Dauphin's at -12, -13 in Thompson at the moment. So we get into this period of these little on and off snow showers as we get through the afternoon hours today. Even into the evening, we have a chance of that still. Portage La Prairie eastward into northwestern Ontario gets that chance of flurries. Tapering off by early morning. Tomorrow morning, again, a mainly cloudy day across the Red River Valley. More like a mix of sun and cloud to the west. Not to say that, over the next few days we won't see some sunshine here in Winnipeg, some sunny breaks, but certainly we are looking at cloud kind of dominating, particularly Tuesday. Wednesday, I think, is a little bit brighter, but still a mostly cloudy sky over the next couple of days. Out of the snow that's falling right now, I think a couple centimeters not out of the question. I think by the time we get to this time tomorrow, totals from Sunday, Monday, more like that 2 to 3 centimeter range. So yeah, a little bit of snow coming to the Red River Valley, but nothing like we've seen back to the west. Forecast high today in Winnipeg, I've got us at -6, -11 into Brandon, where we have seen a little bit of clearing already. Much colder air comes in behind that, though. So we stay at -5 for Tuesday, Wednesday, dropping to a high of -9 on Thursday, maybe a couple of flurries in the morning. And then that real cold air starts to usher its way in, -13s and -12s into the weekend and into early next week.
I think that's when I actually put the scooter away.
Yeah.
Don't want
I think so too.
Frozen metal things. All right, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
It's Bradley Laychuk from your CBC Forecast Center. Of course, you can see his full forecast on our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba, and tune in to Up to Speed this afternoon right here on CBC Radio 1. Just about 37 minutes after 12 o'clock here on CBC Radio 1. We're going to be talking about how hard it's been to find a family doctor. So we'd love to hear from you. If you have questions as well for the Mayor of Steinbach, Earl Funk, you can call our live line 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893. You can text us 204-588-7355. And of course, you can email us radnoonw@cbc.ca, radnoonw@cbc.ca. How hard has it been for you to find a family doctor? If you don't have one, we'll be opening up our phone lines as soon here, still to come. It seems like the universal struggle to find access to a family physician has become a universal part of universal health care. With Canadians struggling to find a doctor right across the country, what's behind this lack of physicians and how do we deal with it? In attempts to tackle low physician numbers in Steinbach, the Physician Recruitment and Retention Task Force was formed earlier this spring. The task force presented City Council in Steinbach with a report outlining long-term solutions to the physicians' shortage. Earl Funk is the mayor of Steinbach and joining us on the line now. Hello, Mayor Funk.
Hello.
How would you characterize the need for physicians in Steinbach? Is it dire?
Yeah, there's an extreme need. We have, I would imagine, somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 people approximately without a doctor in our community. And so given that kind of numbers, this year in February, we started a mayor's task force, which we appointed, or I appointed, and council ratified. And then they met, and then in July, they met a few times in July, and they had given us recommendations on what we could do. What's our next steps?
We'll talk about some of those next steps here. The impact on the community. I mean, what happens when you have folks, citizens who don't have a regular family doctor? What is the impact?
Well, it is huge. I have, for example, one of our city councilors has back spasms that she has to deal with all the time. She does not have a family doctor, so when she runs out of prescription, the prescription that she's given is very hard to get at at just a walk-in clinic. So these are the challenges, and as our population is aging, it's harder and harder to find a doctor. Then we don't have and you just can't get services, right? You can't get taken care of. And I myself am diabetic, so I need to have a doctor. I need to be under a doctor's care, and we need to review medication regularly. And this doesn't happen when you don't have enough doctors in your community.
We're opening up our phone lines, asking folks how hard it's been for you or a loved one to find a family doctor. Call our live line 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893. You can text us 204-588-7355. If you're one of those folks who don't have a family doctor, how do you think life might be different if you did? Imagine if you didn't need to try and speak to a different doctor each time. 204-780-0893. You can text us 204-588-7355. Earl Funk is the mayor of Steinbach. Let's talk about this task force, Mayor Funk. What was it like forming this task force?
Well, you know, it was relatively easy. We've got great people in our community, and I put two counselors on the task force. I put Michelle Vizitny, our economic development officer, on that too, because I do believe that healthcare is part of the whole, is part of our economy as well. And then I had doctors, and I had a couple of, I think I had a retired doctor. I had a couple of other doctors, plus I had the chief of medical staff of our hospital on there too.
Let's talk about that economic connection. You mentioned that you were intentional about having someone from the economic development side of the city. Why was that important? Why was that something that you thought needed to be reflected on this task force?
Well, I believe that as people, pick your community to relocate into or to immigrate to, they look at those kinds of things. They look at healthcare. Especially as we're the major urban center, we're the hub of the Southeast. We have at any given week, we could have 120,000 people that we draw on that do business in our community. So when that happens, then as people retire, they tend to move to urban centers for retirement, and that is also a big healthcare need too. So they're going to look at healthcare before they move, and that is why I thought it was very important to have an economic development officer on that as well.
And so
it made sense.
Is this part of say as you're trying to bring in business into the community, that the advertisement or part of the I guess the call for action is that, hey, come here, we have doctors. Is that part of what you're thinking of, or what you're hoping for?
Yeah, what happens is we become the whole package then, right? We've got amenities, we've got doctors, we've got shopping, we've got good infrastructure, we've got land for your business, that kind of stuff. It's all part and parcel. It's not just there's not one thing that a business will pick to come. It's kind of a whole package. And I believe that the healthcare is part of that package.
You're listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM in Steinbach, and of course on our CBC Manitoba YouTube stream. We're speaking with the mayor of Steinbach, Earl Funk, about the task force that he's created. One of the things he mentioned is that connection between healthcare and economic development. What do you think needs to be done to get more doctors here? Call our live line 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893. You can text us 204-588-7355. We'd love to share your thoughts. Perhaps you have questions for Mayor Funk as well. Let us know. Again, 204-780-0893, 204-588-7355 is our text line. Mayor Funk, you talked about working on long-term solutions. Before we get to the long-term solutions part, do you have yet an answer on what medium-term solutions need to happen?
Well, you know what? I think they came up with four, and I think a couple of the best ones are, one, for example, is to advocate for dedicated seats for the region, like our region, in the medical faculties in our universities. And one thing I've done, I think, for that would be a great midterm solution for us. But what we've done with that is we've taken it now to Cities Caucus. So we met in September in Thompson with all the major centers of our province, and I presented the idea to jointly advocate for dedicated seats in all the major centers, from all the major centers. Because what we found was that as they did the study, that students that originated were raised in the area. They tended to go off to school, get their degree, and they were more likely to come back and take a practice up because they have supports. They've got parents, grandparents, family, relatives, friends, and that all made a lot of sense. So when in September, when I presented that to the AMM Cities Caucus, it was really received well. And today we're at an AMM convention here in Winnipeg, and I will be bringing that up again and just seeing where we've gone. I know AMM themselves have taken it to minister meetings and started advocating on behalf of Cities Caucus with our MLAs. And so I'm looking for an update and what's our next step in advocating for this.
And so would something like that look like if you do have those guaranteed seats? It would be something like the guaranteed seat for Steinbach. Essentially, the student doctor is going to guarantee that they're going to stay in Steinbach. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's for the highest probability of them staying is because they have all their supports here in the community. But that would go also for if we do this collectively as a province from all the urban centers, and there'd be Winkler, there'd be Brandon, there'd be Portage, like every urban center, Thompson, they would all then come back to their communities with highest probability and start their practice.
What's your sense of whether that already exists in terms of, do you have students who want this or who want to do this, but because for a bunch of reasons that they're not able to? How do you know this is something that's going to work?
Well, I know there's two already that have tried twice, have applied twice, have not been received, have not been accepted. So that's why I would think that if they could get accepted, they both told me that if they got accepted, they would definitely come back to Steinbach and start to practice.
Steinbach has had a pretty high population growth. Between 2016 and 2021, your growth rate was 11.4%. Data from World Population Review says it's continued at approximately 2.13% annually since 2021. What happens to communities like yours? How do you address the lack of physicians as populations rise? Because the more people you have, the more doctors might also be needed, right?
Right. And what happens is you're forced to go to Winnipeg, you're forced to go to QDoc, you're forced to, and maybe even, I don't know, some people might just, Google their symptoms, which is, I hope that's not happening, but I would imagine some of that happens too. So just to take all that out, the guesswork, take out the difficulty, it would just be nice to have enough doctors to take care of all the people in our community, that everyone can have a family doctor.
One of the initiatives involves third-party recruitment. We've seen various governments here in this province, both municipal and provincial, try that. What makes you think that's something that's going to work?
Well, it can work, but my challenge with that is the third-party recruitment. Once the term is over, will they stay or will they move on to a different location, right? Where we know that if we have, students that are raised in this community, they will be highly likely to spend 20, 30 years practicing in our community, because I believe the third-party recruitment always has a time limit. So that might be a short-term solution, but what I'm looking for is a long-term solution that will just keep perpetually adding doctors.
Mayor Funk, thanks for making time outside of your conference that you're at right now. I look forward to hearing from you. Let us know what your caucus says about some of the suggestions that you have, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
That is Earl Funk, the mayor of Steinbach. Just about 10 minutes before 1 o'clock here on Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1 and, of course, on our CBC Manitoba YouTube stream. We have some time for music, and it has been a busy and exciting year for Manitoba's Brandy Vesna. The Red River Métis singer-songwriter earned 3 Manitoba Country Music Award nominations, also awarded the 2024 Vince Fontaine Legacy Award. Here she is with one of her newest releases. This is Brandy Vesna with Thinkin' About You. That's Brandy Vesna with Thinkin' About You. Coming up to 53 minutes after 12 o'clock here on CBC Radio 1. In the fight against climate change, it sometimes might feel like there are no easy fixes. But a group of researchers who study the aviation industry says there is some low-hanging fruit high in the sky. And it all has to do with those streaks of white vapor that trail behind jet planes. The CBC's Blair Sanderson has this look at why contrails are such a problem for the planet and what can be done to reduce their harmful effects.
In addition to noise pollution and the emissions that come from burning fuel, jet planes also impact the planet with their condensation trails, also known as contrails. Matteo Mirolo is with the environmental group Breakthrough Energy. He specializes in the science of contrails.
They are created when soot and water vapor are emitted from the jet engines of aircraft in a cold and humid atmosphere. And what happens is that water condenses on those soot particles and freezes into ice crystals that create those white lines behind the planes that you can see in the sky.
Mirolo says those trails, especially the ones that linger and dissipate slowly, act as a kind of blanket in the sky that traps infrared radiation from escaping into space, thereby warming the planet. He says this effect has largely flown under the radar compared to the attention that's paid to carbon emissions from aircraft.
If you take aviation as a whole, research has shown that contrail formation is likely to contribute to climate change at a level that is roughly equivalent to aviation fuel emissions.
Mirolo, along with a team of researchers, presented these findings at this year's COP29 Climate Summit in Azerbaijan.
We have 72,000 registered participants from 196 countries.
That represents a lot of plane trips. But only some of them would have produced contrails those researchers are worried about. That's because contrails are only formed under certain atmospheric conditions. And the good news is planes can often avoid flying at altitudes where significant contrails are produced.
How do you minimize that flight time? You achieve it by rerouting the flights in a way that is similar to the way you avoid turbulent air as an aircraft. So we predict those areas where contrails will have a high climate impact. And those predictions are used by the flight planners. So those people that dispatch aircraft and decide the flight path that these aircraft are going to follow.
Mirolo says that often means changing altitude, sometimes by as little as 1,000 feet.
Shuttle 14, Papa, descent to altitude. Descent altitude 3,000 feet.
Some airlines have already done trials on this. Earlier this year, American Airline Sustainability Officer Jill Blickstein told CBS News how their testing went.
It ended up being, honestly, a lot easier than I expected.
The key is to make sure changing flight paths doesn't burn more fuel to a point that outweighs the positive effect of avoiding contrails. Carlos Lopez de la Osa is with the NGO called Transport and Environment. He says the extra fuel burn is minimal, usually adding an extra few dollars in costs per passenger on a transatlantic flight.
If more people knew that contrails were a problem, airlines would certainly be very keen to tackle this issue, right? But the problem is that not many people are aware. The aviation industry has not done a great job at communicating that this is a problem.
And that's why researchers are eager to present their findings wherever they can, with the hope their plans for change will eventually take off. For CBC Radio, I'm Blair Sanderson.
Thanks very much, Blair. I'm Faith Fundal in for Janet Stewart here on Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, everywhere on the CBC Listen app. And of course, on our CBC Manitoba YouTube stream. Thanks very much for joining us during this lunch hour. Coming up on Up to Speed this afternoon at 5:20, your pet might not show it, but they could be in pain because of a bad tooth. We'll learn the importance of taking care of your pet's teeth and how bad teeth can lead to major health problems. We'll hear more about that coming up at 5:20 this afternoon right here on CBC Radio 1 on Up to Speed. I'll be there with the entire team of the program this afternoon from 3 to 6 p.m. Thanks very much for joining us here on the program on Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1. Marshall Hudgens was on the controls today. Kevin Ipatebo is our streaming producer. Wendy Parker is our producer here on the program. Leif Larson, our senior producer of audio, and Nelly Gonzalez, also our producer. Stay tuned. Coming up next, the next chapter. See ya.